So this is a really sad story, man, but it has to do with a break in a case that just came a few days ago. And the case is originally from 2016. Now, I mentioned to you guys a few times on my channel that there was a high school on the far northwest side of the city called North Grand, okay, and the name tells the location. It's over by North and Grand. And this is a high school where I worked on and off around like 2007, 2008. And at that time, the school was brand new. It was one of these charter schools, high schools on the northwest side that was just getting off the ground when I was working there. It was only freshmen and sophomores in the school, and the rules were really tight. You get into like one fight, and they would kick you out of the school. There was gangs in the school. There was a lot of D's, and there were some Cobras, as I remember, and there may have been some other stuff, but those were the only two gangs I remember being there. But it wasn't the type of school where like you had to do that. You know, it wasn't like everybody was into that. There was definitely a gang presence that you had to try and avoid, but it wasn't Robeson. It wasn't like Sullivan in '05. I'm trying to think what other, like Marshall, Manly, like some of these high schools where it's like, the vast majority of kids do that, and you'd have to like just keep totally to yourself to avoid that stuff. It wasn't like that. Like, it was easy to avoid that if you wanted to. That was something you had to like actively get involved in. Now, that was when I was there in like '07, '08. I don't know if it's changed now at this point, but at any rate, man, there was a freshman at that school named Veronica, and she was killed back in 2016. This is the report from that particular time period when that happened. It said 2 people were shot, including a 15-year-old girl who was killed early Saturday while in a vehicle traveling along Lakeshore Drive near Fullerton Avenue on the city's north side. Now, this is an extremely upscale neighborhood where she was actually killed, or at least like right next to it on Lakeshore Drive. And this is being reported by ABC7. Shout out them. Stuff from Chicago can go down anywhere, and it often involves stuff that doesn't have anything to do with that particular neighborhood. So anyways, Veronica, 15, who was a freshman at North Grand High School in Chicago, was fatally shot, according to the Cook County Medical Examiner's Office. A 28-year-old man driving the vehicle with Veronica sustained non-life-threatening wounds. Now, just as a side note, that 28-year-old was a documented gang member. And I'll reference something that was going on in the car later that, may provide an indication about the case. So police are searching for the shooter, they said. Now, this is from 2016. Police believe the shooting was likely gang-related, and the male driver was the target of the shooting. Veronica was one of about 12 people shot, at least 3 of whom were shot fatally. Since Friday evening, they were saying a violent start to what was a Memorial Day weekend in Chicago. Her mother, Diane, was distraught Saturday. She said, "All the killing is so stupid." The victims were inside of a Jeep Cherokee around 1:30 a.m. So you have a 15-year-old girl out at 1:30 a.m. with a 28-year-old documented gang member. Okay, a black Nissan pulled up to them, and someone inside opened fire. Veronica was shot multiple times. The 28-year-old man in the car that was with her was shot in the arm and sustained a graze wound to the head. The man was able to drive to St. Joseph's Hospital, where he was treated for his injuries, and Veronica was rushed to a different hospital where she died. So they've just made an arrest, okay, in this case. And I'm going to get to the story of this family of women after I talk about this particular arrest. So they've indicted a member of the Milwaukee Kings street gang. And this is a gang that I've talked about a few times before on the channel. I had done a video on 2 guys that had been arrested from that gang. This is a predominantly like Puerto Rican gang on the northwest side. It's not real big. It's not one of the bigger Hispanic gangs in Chicago. And this is one of the things that's kind of baffling about Chicago, the ethnic dynamics and the culture and the gangs. One of the groups in Chicago that goes like the hardest at the gangbanging is Puerto Ricans. I would say even harder than the Mexicans. And actually in some areas of the city, I would say even harder than the blacks. Like, they really get into it. I don't really understand it, because Puerto Ricans, they're very family oriented. A lot of them have a very like traditional culture, but for some reason, I think it goes back to like whites were originally like getting down on them. I'm talking like back in the 60s and 70s, and they were experiencing a lot of discrimination and stuff from whites, and white gangs were, getting down on them, and then they formed their own gangs. But even to this day, it's like a cycle that just doesn't stop. And I see, I've worked at some of these Puerto Rican high schools, like, where they're the majority. They really get into, even the girls, man, they really get into it. The girls go for these gang members, and it's something that really, they would be better without. But a man has been indicted, they said, on a federal racketeering charge for allegedly murdering a teenage girl, they said, to maintain and increase his position in a violent Chicago street gang. A guy named Patrick, 27, of Chicago, is charged with 1 count of murder in aid of racketeering. An indictment returned Thursday, and that was last Thursday, in U.S. District Court in Chicago, accuses Patrick of murdering Veronica on May 28, 2016, for the purpose of maintaining and increasing his position in the Milwaukee Kings street gang. Veronica, 15, was fatally shot while riding in a sport utility vehicle on DuSable Lakeshore Drive in Chicago. Patrick was arrested that morning and remained, at the last update that I heard, detained in federal custody. The indictment and arrest were announced by John Lausch, U.S. State's Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois. But the indictment alleges that the Milwaukee Kings is a criminal organization whose members and associates engaged in narcotics trafficking and committed acts of violence, including murder and assault, to acquire and preserve the gang's territory on the north side of Chicago. Members of the gang intimidated rival gang members and others through acts and threats of violence, according to the indictment. So anyways, the indictment from the feds goes on, but this is the guy who is accused of doing this. I think he's black and Puerto Rican mixed based on his last name, and I think he's got a brother too, although I'm not sure about that. But at any rate, man, you can see on his eyebrow, above one of his eyebrows, I'll try and zoom in on it, the 1311, okay, which stands for the MK, for the Milwaukee Kings. So I would remind you guys that a lot of times they do arrest the wrong guy. In the past, they've sometimes arrested like one particular member from a gang when that's not the real guy, or, stuff like that. So I'm not 100% putting this on him. They may have the right guy, they may not. I'm just saying, like, don't jump to that conclusion from this alone. But at any rate, the guys who were in the car with Veronica had uploaded a Snapchat video. And by the way, I don't think the 28-year-old was the only person in the car with her based on the Snapchat video. But the night that she was killed, or the day she was killed, they had uploaded a Snapchat video in which they were in the car throwing up the rakes. I'll say this, the Milwaukee Kings, they're in a war with the MLDs over basically like the territory around Reese Park. And Reese Park is an area that you guys, I didn't have time to get over there for the footage, but it's like straight west for me from where I'm at now. You guys may have seen it in a few of my videos like a couple summers ago when I was staying over in Forest Park, because it's like right over on the northwestern edge of the city. The D's are really real heavy over there. I would say they're heavier than the MKs, and they're like in a war with them over that. Now, interestingly, like in the Milwaukee Kings history, they used to get along with the MLDs back in the day. The MLDs, the Maniac Latin Disciples, they're like probably the deepest gang on the northwest side. Actually, I would say probably they're the deepest gang on the entire north side. Like them and the Kings are probably tied. The GDs, maybe the GDs, I don't know. But like for Hispanic gangs, MLDs and Kings. And MLDs too, they have a lot of Mexicans with them too, but that's, I would say, too, a predominantly Puerto Rican gang. And they completely like had some of the high schools where I was at. I would say at North Grand, they were probably the deepest. And then Steinmetz, they were real deep over there. But they were like all through the Northwest Side high schools, man. And a lot of the Puerto Ricans, like from the eastern part of Humboldt Park, got pushed west by a lot of the gentrification that was taking place in that area. I don't think the D's were the deepest like in that area at that time, but they got pushed into areas that the MLDs already had as established territory. And so like the younger generation of Hispanic guys that were growing up in that area came up in schools and in areas where the D's already had turf. At any rate, man, so why the D's and the Milwaukee Kings alliance split apart, I don't know. I've read that it was over like the D's trying to charge too much for dope or something like that. It was over something like that. I don't think it was over any killing or anything. But yeah, at that particular time, this was like around 95 when that alliance split up. Okay, and then the Milwaukee Kings went their own way, and they were part of the Folks Alliance previously, but now they're standing on their own, and basically are just, it's like them against everybody. So, and most of their rivals too are like other Puerto Rican gangs, and they've got a lot of guys. I think most of their main guys are locked up now from what I've seen, but there's always new generations coming up. But at any rate, they also beef with the Simon City Royals, and I think they beef with the IGs too. So the guys in the car with her may have been IGs, but I don't think so based on the high school where she went and based on the area where she's from. I think they were probably Ds, but they were throwing up brakes on this Snapchat video like that was taken the day that she was killed. So, you know, anybody that can start to point fingers, I'm going to get to that later. I don't think finger pointing is appropriate for reasons that I'll touch on later in the video. But at any rate, man, getting onto the story of these women and how exactly this girl Veronica got to be in touch with, you know, these much older gang members. So this whole saga started with the mother, whose name was Diana, and these interviews were gotten by the New York Times. Shout out to them, man. But this is a sad story that's very typical of a lot of the females that I've seen, especially on the northwest side of Chicago, man. So they said at Veronica's Sweet 16 party, children played amongst the headstones by the cemetery, and aunts, uncles, and cousins sat on lawn chairs and stripped blankets on the grass. Veronica's grave was there. They were celebrating her Sweet 16 at her grave. Her 4 older sisters pressed candles into a red velvet cake and lit them. Veronica's nickname was Dayday, and she was buried in that cemetery just to the west of the city of Chicago in June of that year after being shot to death at 15. They said she was a friendly girl who loved swimming. She was really into science projects, and she wanted to move away from Chicago's violence toward a better life. She was one of 6 people killed in gunfire over that weekend. Altogether, 64 people had been shot in those 3 days, which had started off a summer of bloodshed, they said, that continued into that fall. She was the only female killed that weekend. She was not in a gang. The police and her family both said that, but they said gangs were a part of her life. Veronica came from a family of women. She was the youngest of 5 daughters, and she was raised by a single working mom. And almost all of them got into relationships with men that were in gangs. So they said Veronica tried to be vigilant. And this is according to the Times. They said she avoided walking down the street with gang members, including friends that she had known since elementary school. And that's part of the dilemma that a lot of these kids face. You know, they go to elementary school with these kids that then later join gangs. And then it's like they can't stop hanging out with their friends that they've had since they were little. But now their friends are on something totally different that could get them killed. And that's a tough decision to make. They said she rarely went to parties because she was worried about fights and gunfire. And that's smart. But they said that that couldn't stop the violence that struck close to her again and again over the past year. They said tensions from gang rivalries and at least 3 shootings of people that she knew personally intruded on her teenage life, leading her to dwell on the possibility of dying. So her mother was asleep at 2 a.m. on May 28th when she awoke to the dog barking. She found police at the door, and they said, "Do you know Veronica?" And they said she may have been shot. So the first time that her mom had tried to get away from gang violence happened in the middle of the night back in February of 2021. And she had just packed up, like in a hurry, put all of her belongings into the trunk of her car. Veronica was only 5 months old at that time. She said that she had to get her oldest daughter, whose name was Samantha, away from the gang that she was falling into. Now, her mom made a very brave move. Her oldest daughter was getting involved, you know, with guys that were in gangs, and she wanted to get her away from that. So she did, you know, what she was supposed to do and just packed up and left. In doing that, though, she had to leave Veronica's father behind, and he was being threatened by other gang members. Now, what gang he was in, they didn't say, but Veronica's, I'm talking about the 15-year-old victim here, her dad was a gangbanger, and so she had to get away from him. She said, "We packed whatever we could in the car. I just wanted to get my kids away from there." However, leaving the dad behind, though, that's, you know, that's a questionable decision, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. So she drove to a neighborhood on the northwest side of Chicago called Belmont-Cragen. Now, the area that she had left was the suburb of Cicero. Cicero is an area that's plagued by gangs. There's a lot of, again, it's like Latino gangs down there. And, you know, she wanted to get away from all that, but she went to Belmont-Cragen, which also has gangs. And I would say, in a way, it's kind of worse than Cicero. I mean, she kind of went out of the frying pan into the fire with this. And this is what I, you know, tell a lot of these moms, like, you know, if you want to ask anybody, like, who is familiar with multiple neighborhoods in the city, because even if you talk to gang members, most gang members only really know what's going on in their own neighborhood, you know, or in their own stretch of the city. But, you know, there's certain people that, like police, cab drivers, I mean, people who know the whole city. Like, you gotta ask somebody who knows the whole city, because, you might be leaving one place to go to someplace totally worse. So she left Cicero to go to Belmont Cragen, and Belmont Cragen's a neighborhood where, again, like North Grand High School, that's kind of like a microcosm of the neighborhood in general. Like, you can avoid that if you want, but you're gonna meet people that are in that, and if you're a girl, these girls, they get these crushes on these guys, and it's like, once they get that crush, man, there ain't nothing you can do. Like, as a parent, it's like a cat, and I say this not to mock them. I think this is an accurate metaphor. It's like a cat when it sees a rat or a mouse. It's like every cell in its body is instinctively propelling it towards that other animal, and there's literally nothing you can do to stop it. You can't train it. You can't incentivize it with treats or anything. There is nothing you can. It's going to go for it, like, period. And these females, man, once they get a crush on a guy, it doesn't matter if the guy is like Freddy Krueger in the flesh. They're going for this guy, period, point blank. Doesn't matter if the guy's killed 20 people and he's got, the biggest street reputation. And for some girls, that's a turn on. She said that, she couldn't get away from the violence, so she had to go someplace cheap. She couldn't afford to live where there was no violence. And that, again, you can get a place in a safe neighborhood if you're willing to live in a cramped space, which is worth it. It's 100%. I promise you, I got less money than any of these moms. Like, I'm straight broke. Like, I'm a broke bum. And I've lived in places, that are, like, I can walk outside at night, like, not have to worry about nothing. Because I'm willing to live in a place the size of a closet. Well, if you're a mom, okay, that might be a little bit tougher to do, but still, like, it's totally worth it. Because if one of your kids is dead, like, that's going to make you rethink the whole thing. So at any rate, she got a steady job at an auto parts store, and her daughter, who was then 16, chose not to return to school, instead helping her mother by caring for her siblings. And her siblings' names were Amanda, Destiny, Miranda, and Veronica. So in elementary school, she made friends easily, and she was the stage manager for a school play. Even before joining the cheerleading squad in middle school, she led her nephew and cousins through routines in the backyard. And in the summer, she swam in public pools, and she was learning how to swim, and so she had, a lot of stuff going on. They could have distracted her and kept her away from, guys that were involved in gangs. And in 2015, she started dating a guy named Jojo. I'm not going to say his real name, but this became like her boyfriend. Okay, so this guy, he was only like 15 years old at the time, like the same age as her, like 15, 16. And I'll touch back on what he had going on later, man. But the men in the lives of these women, they said, tended to bring trouble. So Veronica's mother, Diane, first had a guy named Miguel, and this was her first real boyfriend. And they said she admired him for his fearlessness. The second guy she was with was a guy named Guy. That was his name. She didn't bring up anything having to do with gangs. She just said, I loved the way that he danced. He was real romantic. I used to love being in his arms. But all these guys was involved in a gang, and they didn't say which gang. But she said that, she couldn't, like, avoid guys that were involved in gangs. She said, who wasn't in a gang? That was the question she asked. Now, I don't know what area she was growing up in. I don't think she was growing up in Belmont Cragen, but if she was in Cicero, and I don't know if she was in Cicero or not, but I don't know if Cicero is really one of those areas where everybody's in a gang. Anybody that lives in Cicero, you can let me know, but like, there's certain areas that are like that, like back of the yards, little village. But even down there, like, I worked at Farragut High School on the southwest side. Like, not everybody was in that. Like, you could find a crowd where that wasn't going on. It's just like, a lot of the girls tend to go for guys that are like that and involved in that life. But there's definitely guys that are not like that. However, when you're in the moment, like when you're a 14, 15, 16-year-old girl, I'm not sure if a lot of them are able to, like, put themselves into the position that they're going to be in mentally, like 15 years down the road, when they're a single mom with, 4 or 5 kids by different dads. They're all dead or locked up because they were in gangs, like, mentally that would probably be a pretty tough exercise to perform. But he was in relationships with these different gang members, and every relationship, she gave birth to another daughter by a different guy. And the relationship, they said, usually ended when the guy went to jail. But when they said, even when the relationship ended, the children resulting from them, they said, can knit gang affiliations deeper into families. So these daughters all had dads that were in gangs. So her mom tried to warn her daughters. She said, "Didn't you learn from me?" She said, quote, "You can't walk the streets with these guys. You can't go to the movies. It's too dangerous." She told Veronica, "Be careful. Bullets have no names." So again, this could have been avoided had they, moved to a cramped space in a different area, because like I said, if you're the mom, you know these girls are going to get these crushes on these guys. And then at that point, like, there's nothing you can do. There was a time when Diane was relieved that all of her kids were girls. She said it made them less likely to be recruited by gangs to get into trouble to end up in prison. But all four of Veronica's sisters ended up dating men who were affiliated with gangs, all four of them. And three had kids with them. Veronica's boyfriend, Jojo, also described loose gang ties. So he didn't gangbang, he said, but he said, "I just chill with them." And in some ways, that's even worse, because it's like, you don't have to be doing this. Like, you're not even making any money off this. Like, you're not getting any clout or anything like that. You're just hanging out with these guys. Those ties can be hard to cut, especially if you're still living in the area, but it's like, man, you got to do it. The trouble, they said, got worse for Diane's family when one sister's boyfriend defected to a different gang, so he pancaked. So remaining in the original gang was another one of the sister's boyfriends. Now, they're not naming which gang this is, but that area, like I said, it's like D's, Cobras, IGs. It's like a lot of like these folks gangs, like Hispanic folks gangs. They said now it's like a war because they left, according to the mom. And she said that put us in the middle of it. So the one guy decides to pancake. And these Hispanic gangs, man, when you pancake, like, they take that seriously. Like, I've seen guys get pressed in, with my own two eyes in real life for making that decision. So in the last year of Veronica's life, the danger got steadily closer to home. He said, like any other young teenager about to start high school, she was focused on her freshman year. She would be a freshman at North Grand High School, and they said it was considered one of the better, safer schools in the area. And she also had a new brother, and I say that in quotations, and his name was Rico. He was a teenager that her mother had taken in when he was kicked out of his own home, and he was in a gang. But Diane saw him as a sweet-natured and vulnerable young man, a victim of peer pressure, and she, was saying he was a really nice kid. He used to cook for them. And for a time, he was dating one of Veronica's sisters, his sister Miranda. Her sister Miranda, he was dating her when she was living with them. Now, these gangs, they'll roll on the crib. You know that, right? I mean, they'll roll on somebody's house and just air the place out if they know that you stay there. I mean, once they get the drop, 1 week before classes were to start, her mother called with heartbreaking news. Rico had been fatally shot in the neighborhood park. So Veronica took it really hard. They said she went crazy. Suddenly, friends and family began seeing a despairing side to her. She seemed to fixate on death, telling friends that she envisioned being reincarnated as a butterfly. They said she'd always talk about, "I really want to see Rico. I just want to go with him to heaven." And one of her friends said, "It worried me when she said that." So the violence around Veronica continued. In March, the ex-boyfriend of another one of her sisters was killed in gang violence. And in April, Veronica herself was caught up in that shooting. So she, her sister, and her sister's baby were riding in a car with a close family friend when they stopped for gas and were confronted by two men in another car who flashed gang signs. Veronica jumped out of the car and said, quote, "He's not part of that life," and she screamed at them. And she ordered the two men to leave her friend alone, but one of the men opened fire. Veronica was standing right next to her friend who was shot, and she escaped injury. So she could have been killed in this incident, but she wasn't. The police soon made an arrest, and Diane was told that prosecutors needed Veronica to testify before a grand jury because she was a witness. So she resisted. She didn't want to do that. She was worried that it would make her daughter a target. She said, "I don't want my child testifying." And she said, and they said that the state will subpoena her if they have to. So Veronica was 15 at the time, and she got up there and told the story to grand jurors. So life at school after that became, they said, quote, "very shaky." Veronica was failing classes. Sometimes she skipped school. On more than one occasion, she was sent home for fighting. And she said that these were skirmishes that her mother said were provoked by other girls. Friends said that she sometimes burst into tears and had to be comforted by teachers. Diane said, quote, I know she was angry. She was like, "Why do they have to keep killing people that I love?" So Diane was growing more and more worried by the day. She'd always seen herself as a supportive mother and a friend to her girls, and she was reluctant to put too many restrictions on Veronica. So more and more, Veronica told friends that she wanted to get out of Chicago. She pressed her mother to let her move to California to live with her brother, who was a Marine. Then she abandoned that plan and started daydreaming with her mother about the two of them making a new life in Florida. So here's the thing. There's gangs everywhere. There's hoods, where this thing is going on like all over the country. It's not the city, it's the part of the city. Literally, you take the bus like straight east from where she was at, and she could have gotten to a sweet area where she wouldn't have had to worry about none of that. So I'm talking like 15 minutes away. Like I'm through, like her neighborhood, I used to go there every single day for work. Like I've, been there all the time. Even that area, it's like literally, you can take the bus 10, 15 minutes north or east of that, and you're in an area where like it's totally fine. So they said after Rico died, she realized this was a dangerous city. This is according to one of her school friends. She said she wanted to get away from here and have a good life. So that Friday night and Memorial Day weekend, she was in the car with this 28-year-old whose name was Jose. And he was the uncle of a high school classmate. And they said that night she was again in his Jeep. So this wasn't the first time she had ridden with him. And the windows were rolled down. On their way to Lakeshore Drive, they stopped at a gas station where Jose exchanged taunts with a couple of strangers. But the carload of people, there were 4 in the back seat, and Veronica and Jose were in the front, just laughed it off and kept driving. At one point, Jose posted a video on Snapchat and disrespecting another gang. Veronica sent a text to her boyfriend Jojo wishing him good night. When he didn't respond, she wrote, "Can you say it back at least? What if I die tonight?" And then she did end up dying that night. And the beaches alongside the 8-lane Lakeshore Drive are largely empty after midnight. Lake Michigan is on one side and you have the city on the other side. So Veronica had another friend in the back seat, a female friend. And she remembers looking out of the window and watching the city. And then all of a sudden she just heard glass breaking. And at first, she thought another car had crashed into them. Then she realized it was gunshots. And they said shards of glass were flying everywhere. She screamed and ducked. Jose said later that he couldn't see much of the attack. He said, "We were innocently driving. I'm smiling, she's smiling. I hear boom and another boom, and I see the windshield come in bullet holes. They pull right alongside and start shooting at least 15 shots. One bullet hit Jose in his left arm, another grazed his forehead. Veronica was hit over and over, 3 times in her left arm, once in her shoulder, and once in her torso. So they raced to the hospital, and Veronica was bleeding heavily and drifting in and out of consciousness. Everyone remembers her saying one thing, "I love you guys." So Veronica's mother got the news that she was dead, and she vomited into a trash can. The police didn't have too much to say that morning, and she's talked to them only a few times since, she said, quote, "At that time, that they don't know anything at that point, and they told me that I'll hear something before they do." So this article is from like 7 years ago. So Diane said that she heard rumors about who was following the Jeep that night and who was the target. More than 5 months later, they said her death is still a mystery. Now, it's not a mystery anymore. The police have made that break in the case. They said, quote, "Was she killed because she was in the car with targeted gang members?" That was the working theory of the Chicago Police Department. Was it because of her grand jury testimony? A rumor at school? Her mother does not believe that Veronica was the intended target. Diane has at times appeared paralyzed by grief. She said most of the time, I go to sleep and I hope I never wake up again. And definitely stay prayed up always. Since Memorial Day weekend, her mom found comfort sitting at Veronica's grave over at the Queen of Heaven Cemetery, and it's got pink flowers and balloons and a black and white portrait with a plastic stake that says "Sister" in cursive lettering. And they said this is where her mom spends her days off from work. In the quiet of the cemetery, she thinks about the what ifs, as she calls them. What if Veronica had never met that guy? What if Veronica had moved to California to live with her brother? What if Veronica was still alive and the two were preparing to move to Florida? And but see, again, if you move to California or Florida, there's guys out there that are in that too. You know what I'm saying? So if you go with these guys and hang out with them and are attracted to them and stuff, it can still happen over there. So it's not the city, it's the choices you make in that city. But her mom, but there's definitely certain neighborhoods where it's easier to make the right choice. Okay, I'll say that. So her mom now is free to leave Chicago behind. Her 4 other daughters are all grown. The mom said that she said, "I'm not going to go anywhere now." She said, "I'm not going to leave my baby," and she's referring to, her daughter being in the cemetery. She said, "I'm not leaving Chicago because I'm not leaving my baby behind." So what can we learn from this, right? Almost all of the sisters were involved with guys that were in gangs. The mom had been involved with 3 guys that were in gangs. Now, I don't want to judge any of them because, again, the mom, I don't even know the area where she grew up. They said Cicero was like the place she'd been living before that, but I don't know. She might have been in a little village or some area where it was like, even more gang infested. But I know how emotions are, and I know that when you fall for a particular person, it's like I said, there's nothing you can do. You can get away from the person, okay? That's one thing, and she made that move on one of the daughters, to get away from the dad. In hindsight, though, at that particular age, that decision is kind of questionable because even if the dad is in a gang, in some ways it's better to have the dad there because, like I said, even if he's in a gang, like he can still keep guys away from the daughters that are involved in that. Even guys that are in gangs, a lot of times they don't want their kids involved in that. I don't know what kind of guy that dad was. There's some dads that encourages their kids to get in gangs. Like they really do. Like the dad is the whole problem. Like he literally brainwashes the kids and indoctrinates them with the gang stuff from the time that they're little. But then there's other dads that are gangbangers, but they don't want their kids to have anything to do with that. And any kids that try to hang around their kids, they're involved in that, like the dad will scare them off. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know which kind of dad this was. That I would have to know that before I know if she made the right move on that. But that's a tough call. But emotionally, man, like I said, man, you got to stay prayed up because these emotions are too hard to control. Once they start going for a particular person, you got to take them away from that person, man, because they're gonna go for them. And when they're around so many guys that are doing that, I can tell you this, like even at areas like Belmont Cragen, okay, maybe not everybody's involved in that, which they're not. I mean, there's guys out there that are not involved in that, but like the popular guys, the guys that get all the respect, they're involved in that. And that draws these girls, it does, the respect and all that kind of stuff. They're attracted to that. I don't know if that's what Veronica's sisters were attracted to. Maybe they just knew these guys from someplace else or whatever, but yeah, you want to get into an area where there's like almost practically nobody doing that. I mean, they could have gone to Taft. Like I don't want to rub salt on an open wound with the mom, but I'm saying this for other moms out there that are, in that neighborhood in the same situation. You can easily, find another place in an area of the Northwest Side where that's like barely going on if you just move into a cramped space, and it's totally worth it. Life is going to be uncomfortable. It is. Like I was alone and life was uncomfortable for me, like in some of these, places where I've stayed at. But look at how some of these immigrants do it, like we got immigrants living, in like the sweet areas of like West Rogers Park, like 3 families to like a single apartment, you know what I'm saying? Like, and they do it and they get it done and their kids are going to schools where there's like practically no gangbangers and they turn out, to have long lives. So there's tough choices that have to be made, but it's worth it. And sometimes I think a lot of people just don't know. A lot of moms just don't know about the availabilities, So at any rate, man, rest in peace to Veronica. But for all the girls out there, man, think of that moment before you get involved, because there's no good way that this ends. Like even if the guy doesn't get you killed, like even if you don't get killed or he doesn't get killed, where is he headed in that life? Like most of these gangbangers are not doing good in school. They're not. They're flunking out. They're dropping out. And the only way that can end is even if they don't get killed, what are they going to do? Like, how is that going to end and lead to them being in a situation where they can support a family? It can't end. It can't go that way. Like, they're going to end up broke, in and out of jail and stuff. And it's like you can't raise a family with guys like this. And that's a long-term consideration. I know that might not, get you in your feelings for the guy like when you're a teenage girl and you see him on top, okay, he's on top of the world that you're living in at that point. You're in school. He's getting all the respect. He seems to be like the alpha male. He's the top guy. He's not going to be the top guy 10 years down the road. He's going to be at the bottom. And the alpha male at that point is going to be the guy that was the nerd, the geek, the one everybody else was making fun of because he was stuck in those books and he wasn't doing none of that, gang stuff. Yeah, well, everybody else is going to be calling him boss 10 years from now. You see what I'm saying? Like, I know that's tough to think about when you're a teenage girl, but like there's no exit strategy. There's no end game in that gang life. And the girls that hang around with these guys, it's guilt by association. Even if you're not even caught in crossfire, you could be intentionally killed just because of the fact that you hang out with that guy. So there's no way to avoid it, man. You're rolling the dice a different time every day, and eventually you're gonna roll those cat's eyes. So it's not worth it. But I keep on seeing these girls make the same mistakes over and over again. When he tells you he loves you, if he loved you, he'd drop his flag and he would stop doing the stuff that's going to put you at risk. That's what a person who really loves you is going to do. Okay? It's your boy Winnie City Report. I'm out.